Good morning. Earlier this year, we began a series through the book of Proverbs. I've titled it Proverbs, Principles for Life, because the book of Proverbs, as we talked about in our first lesson, is about these lifelong principles, these God-given, very simple yet profound lessons that we can learn and take with us through really every aspect of our life. And I am, personally a very big fan of Proverbs. I'm a fan of the entire Bible, for the record, but I really do like the book of Proverbs because it's just very, very practical. And I really appreciate its practicality. I believe that all of us can benefit from going through the book of Proverbs and seeing what it has to say on the various topics that it addresses. And I'm not going to completely rehash everything that we covered in the first lesson, but essentially what I did was I gave an overview of what the book of Proverbs, what makes it unique, kind of dealt with its content, its structure, just to really summarize what we covered last time if you weren't here. The book of Proverbs is a collection of wise sayings, and it addresses a large variety of topics. And although it kind of touches on a little bit of everything, we can generally group the content into maybe buckets or themes that are recurring throughout. And so the goal of our series has been to take these major themes. Last time we looked at pride, humility, and the tongue. To take major themes like these and to sample some proverbs that deal with these themes and to try to draw out some leading ideas and some practical lessons from each one. And that's what we're going to be doing this morning. We're going to take two new themes, two new topics from the book of Proverbs and see what the book has to say about these things. The first thing we're going to look at is the theme of self-control. We're going to be looking at the topic of self-control. This is, as we know in the New Testament, a very important quality. It's a fruit of the Spirit, according to Galatians 5. It is a supplement to our faith, according to 2 Peter 1. It's even said to be the key to effective prayer, according to 1 Peter 4:7. It's an expectation of older men, an exhortation to younger men, and it is a quality a man must possess if he is to be an elder, according to the book of Titus. And self-control is something that is really respected not just within the church, but in every realm. No matter what discipline or field you are in, typically what you'll find is the most successful individuals are going to be those who are, probably outliers in the realm of self-control or self-discipline. They're going to be exceptionally, they're going to have an exceptional command over themselves. Now, as it's always been noted, especially in the case of athletes, is sometimes that self-control is maybe specific to their craft, and in other realms that self-control is lacking. The Bible urges us to have a all-encompassing self-control, not just limited to our career or to whatever it is that our profession is, but that it is part of who we are in every single realm, whether it be in our family, whether it be in the church or in our job or just in general. Self-control is an indispensable quality. Booker T. Washington once noted that after considerable experience in coming into contact with wealthy and noted men, I have observed that those who have accomplished the greatest results are those who keep under the body, those who never grow excited or lose self-control, but are always calm, self-possessed, patient, and polite. And so because self-control is clearly such a valuable, practical quality, we're going to spend some time seeing what the book of Proverbs has to say about it, how we develop it, and what value it has for us. And then our second thing we're going to look at is the topic of work ethic. We're going to look at what work ethic is, or at least what a proper work ethic should consist of. The average individual spends about 1/3 of their life working. And anything that takes up that much of our life ought to be done well. And we ought to understand what it means to work hard, what it means to be a good steward of the opportunities we've been given in the realm of work. And so we're going to take some time to consider the topic of work ethic, because although it's a distinct topic from the subject of self-control, the self-control and work ethic overlap so much with one another that it's really, I think, beneficial to study them in tandem to one another, because we're going to see some consistencies as we go through them. But those are going to be our two topics this morning, is self-control and work ethic. We're going to start with self-control, and then we'll close by considering work ethic. So, having said that, let's talk about what the Proverbs has to say about self-control. So, Proverbs 25:28 says that a man with self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. So, in the introduction, I was emphasizing the practical value of self-control and how it can benefit us in all of these different realms. But the book of Proverbs isn't really, I think, treating self-control as just a tool for success. It treats self-control very seriously. It treats it as a matter of life and death. And this illustration that's being used here, a city that's broken into and left without walls, if you imagine a city that has no walls, especially at the time that this is being written, a city without walls was exposed. It was vulnerable. It was susceptible to all kinds of enemy attacks, and there would have been really no line of defense against the dangers that naturally would come up against that city. And likewise, a man who has no self-control is going to be susceptible to really any temptation that he encounters. There's really not going to be any restraint or any sort of sense of control that protects him from these dangers and these temptations, these passions. So what a man needs is walls, so to speak. He needs restraint. He needs to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to hold my tongue here. I'm not going to get engaged, or I'm not going to get into this argument. I'm not going to satisfy this craving. Whatever it may be, a man must have walls. He must have the ability to deny himself and tell himself no. Because if he does not, then really he will suffer. If he has a family, his family will suffer. Everyone around him will suffer, because he's not going to have really any of the necessary restraints that would protect him and those around him. And so what we need is to raise and fortify these walls and really develop this sense of self-control. But this sense of self-control is not something that we're born with. It's not something that we begin life and just kind of have this natural sense of where those boundaries ought to be, and this natural sense of restraint. It's something that we have to develop throughout our lives. And the book of Proverbs teaches us that the sooner we begin building these walls of restraint, the better off we'll be. And so what we want to consider first is developing self-control in childhood. Because childhood's really the best time to begin developing self-control, because you're young, you're very impressionable. It's very easy to kind of build up these walls at this age. However, the stakes are very high, because if we don't begin building up these walls, a child is just as susceptible as this city that is broken into and left without walls. A child needs the parental guidance of a loving parent to help them kind of set these walls up, to teach them what boundaries they need to respect, what areas they need to exercise restraint. And so the book of Proverbs teaches us how that is done. Proverbs 22:15 says that folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. Children are not born naturally bad. I was a very ornery kid, very stubborn kid, but I think even I wasn't born naturally bad. I think, what I had was just a lot of foolishness bound up in my heart. And so what is required then is a parent's this refining tool of discipline. This is really how a parent helps their child build up these walls of restraint. Before a child is really old enough to have developed this mature, fully formed sense of self-control, that self-control has to be taught to them. They have to be kind of guided into it through the active engagement of a parent. And so the book of Proverbs teaches us that this discipline is essential in childhood in order for us to develop this. And so it helps children, I think, when they understand that what this process is about, that it's not just something that's being done out of anger, or something that's being done that is just a reaction. This is a proactive effort on the parent's part to help the child. And while it's certainly a multi-dimensional effort, there's much more to raising children than just discipline. I understand that. However, it's worth noting that when the book of Proverbs deals with this issue, it consistently refers us to what we might refer to here as the rod of discipline. And other forms of discipline certainly exist. It's not the exclusive of discipline that there is, but the book of Proverbs teaches us that not all forms of discipline are equally effective. Proverbs 29:19 says, "By mere words a servant is not disciplined, for though he understands, he will not respond." So words certainly have a place in the realm of discipline. Sometimes what a child needs is maybe a stern talking to. I don't know, what the occasion calls for specifically, but while words certainly have their place, and maybe other forms of discipline may be appropriate, they're usually going to be a poor second to the rod of discipline, because the most memorable lessons are often the ones that are the most painful. Those are the ones that stick with us. Those are the ones that we remember. And so we need to keep in mind that the primary means of discipline in childhood is the rod, or the rod of discipline, according to the book of Proverbs. And this, I think, especially in our day and age, as our culture is becoming increasingly softer, this form of discipline sounds severe to many people. But the book of Proverbs never presents it as an act of anger. It is never presented as something that is done out of, as I said, an emotional reaction on the parent's part. It's something that is being done out of a place of love. It's something that's being done strategically, proactively, with wisdom, with a cool head, but always in the best interest of the child, and never to provoke them to anger, never to just merely punish them for the sake of punishing them. In fact, the book of Proverbs teaches us not only is this form of discipline an act of love, to withhold it from a child is an act of neglect. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is discipline him." So to discipline is to love, to withhold discipline is to neglect. And at this stage in life, it's going to take a great deal of diligence on the parent's part. It's going to take a lot of effort and consistency, but the result is well worth the effort. Proverbs 29:17 says, "Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart." So in some ways, this form of discipline early on in childhood, I think, makes for a harmonious relationship between the parent and the child. But it's not just a matter of the short-term effect or the immediate benefits of discipline. It sets the child up for success in the long term. And that's really what I think this is all about. As we said at the beginning, helping the child build these walls up so that when they're an adult, they're already there. They're already, they've been established, and they're able to enjoy the fruits of that discipline that they were taught at a young age. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." So this is not just a matter of just a short-term solution. It is a long-term game. It is a means of setting a child up for success throughout the entirety of their life. Passage that I think is fitting here is Hebrews 12:11. It says, "For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." And childhood discipline's not going to be enjoyable in the moment. It's going to be painful, probably for the child and the parent. But what is painful in childhood becomes an asset in adulthood. The discipline that's being taught to a child at this early stage in their life is going to benefit them in a variety of ways as they get older. And so what I want to consider now is what the value of self-control is in adulthood. So far we've considered kind of how it develops and how it is shaped throughout the early stages. But now I want to consider how it really pays off throughout adulthood and why self-control is so crucial. Well, the first thing I want us to observe is that self-control is really the ultimate form of strength. The book of Proverbs teaches us that self-control is the ultimate form of strength. Proverbs 16:32 says, "Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit, he who makes a city." The irony is that there are many men who have achieved a great deal of strength and power in an outward sense. They've been able to conquer cities and level entire nations, but they lacked the self-control to subdue themselves. And so they've been slaves to their own emotions, their own cravings, their own passions. And a man with that sort of character is really not a strong man at all. We think about the person and the story of Samson. He really makes an excellent case study for the importance of self-control. Because Samson was a man who could take down 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. But then whenever it came to a single Philistine woman, he could not resist himself. He could not handle the enticement. And so we have from Samson this perfect case study that teaches us that strength alone is useless if we do not use it to subdue ourselves first. We must subdue ourselves, our emotions, our cravings, in order to really achieve any real sense of strength. Physical strength alone will fail us, but self-control will stay with us for life. So, self-control is the ultimate form of strength, but it's also the ultimate form, or the ultimate key, rather, to peace. It is the ultimate key to peace. Proverbs 15:18 says that a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. And then Proverbs 17:27 has a similar thought. It says, "Whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who has a cool spirit is a man of understanding." So throughout our lives, we're going to be faced with conflict. Really, no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to escape the inevitable conflicts that we face, whether it be in the workplace, in the family, in the church, wherever it may be. And what we really need in order to navigate these conflicts successfully is a cool spirit. We need to have restraint. We need to have the self-control, the moderation, the temperance to be able to handle conflict without being reactive or being overly emotional. I'm certainly not opposed to emotion. I'm going to bring up things like emotion and passion several times. I'm certainly not saying that these things are inherently wrong. They have their place, but they have to be placed within the proper walls. They have to be placed within the proper boundaries. And self-control helps us to really channel things like passion and emotion, which are without any restraint very dangerous, but with self-control they can be very effectively used, and especially in realms of conflict. Because conflict is going to be when we're most vulnerable to these fits of passion. to maybe the anger, the frustrations that we may feel. And we need this ability to hold ourselves back, to restrain the things that we say in the midst of those conflicts, to maybe even walk away until we can calm down and cool off, and then to return to the conflict whenever we have that time and we have that space to be able to approach it more productively. We talked about this in our first study when we talked about the tongue and the importance of its use. And we talked about conflict and how our words are really the means that God has given us to navigate these conflicts, and that can either be a tool or it can be a weapon. And we want to make sure that we use it as a tool. We want, conflict is not bad in and of itself. Conflict, it needs to happen often. There needs to be, whenever there is an issue, whenever there is something that needs to be addressed, we don't need to run from that, but we need to approach it with the proper restraint and the proper self-control to be able to handle it with wisdom. And so really, I think navigating conflict and reaching peace, which ought to be the goal of every conflict, is to reach a state of peace between the parties. It requires a great deal of self-control. Those who, as we saw in Proverbs 15:18, stir up strife, those who lack self-control, they're going to really just escalate every conflict they encounter. They're going to constantly be, saying the wrong thing. They're going to be, walking away from conflict wishing they hadn't said what they said, or maybe they hurt somebody and they can't take it back. And they're going to really lose a lot of relationships. They're going to lose a great deal of respect because they lack the self-control to restrain themselves and to hold themselves back. Maintaining peace demands that we practice this self-restraint. This requires us to take some things on the chin, not react to certain things that we may like to react to, and we may sometimes, walk away from a conflict, maybe wishing we had said more. But in my experience, I would rather wish I had said more than to have wished I hadn't said what I said. There's been many times where I've walked away and, as I'm looking back on a conflict, I've thought, man, I should have addressed that, or I should have, maybe I should have worded it this way. That pales in comparison to the regret I feel whenever I do say the first thing that pops into my head, and then I'm thinking, I wish I had never said that. So we have to really use this self-control, even if it borders on us possibly not saying things we would have liked to have said. And we may not always, be vindicated in our conflicts the way we'd like to, but remember, God sees all. And even if our restraint doesn't result in peace with the person we are in conflict with, it will always result in peace with God, because God loves peacemakers, and He loves to see whenever we are willing to take things on the chin, not take things personally, and preserve relationships for the sake of peace. And self-control is that key to peace. So self-control is the key to strength, it is the key to peace, and finally, I want us to note that it is the key to pleasure. Self-control is the key to pleasure. Now that probably sounds very counterintuitive, because self-control usually involves denying ourselves pleasures. It's about saying no to ourselves and our cravings, as I said. But I want us to note that self-control isn't about the absence of pleasure. It's about putting pleasure in its proper place. Understanding proportion, understanding, as we said, boundaries, and understanding how to make the proper use of God's blessings, these pure forms of enjoyment that He has placed before us. So Proverbs 21:17, I think, really highlights the issue here. It says, "Whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich." Pleasure, I think, is very much like money. We've often noted that money in and of itself is not wrong. It is the love of money that becomes a problem. It is the love of money that is the root of all kinds of evil. And pleasure is it is the love of pleasure that gets us into trouble. And so what we need is self-control and restraint to allow us to enjoy the things that God intends for us to enjoy without going into excess or even going into realms which He does not intend for us to enjoy. I think that this is a proverb that I think about often just because it's very vivid, but Proverbs 25:16 I think is kind of conveying this lesson in a way. It says, "If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest you have your fill of it and vomit it." So honey, when we think about honey, it's primarily known for its sweetness. It's very sweet to the taste. It's a natural dessert. But as is the case with most desserts, we can easily overindulge. We can easily consume too much of it on account of its sweetness. And I think what's interesting here in this proverb is it's not telling us to abstain from honey entirely. It's telling us to enjoy it with moderation. It's telling us to enjoy it with restraint. And I don't think this proverb is really dealing so much with how much honey to eat, or I don't think that's necessarily the focus. I think this is an illustration of this principle that I'm trying to convey here, and that is that pleasure and God's blessings, these pure forms of enjoyment that He's given us, need to be enjoyed in moderation. They need to be enjoyed in a measured way. And there's many things like this. There's many things that God has given us that are good for us that can become bad for us if we don't exercise self-control and restraint with them. Just a few that I was able to think of was sleeping. Sleep is one that we all know is good for us. We, in fact, probably need more of it than we're getting, for most of us. And the Psalms tell us that God grants sleep to those He loves. Sleep is a blessing. It's something we need. But Proverbs 20:13 says, "Do not love sleep lest you come to poverty." Sleep is something that you can overdo. If you sleep all day, every day, and you don't, you're oversleeping when you need to be getting up and going to work. If you're, lying around all the time, you're not making proper use of that blessing. Eating, of course, is another one. There's nothing that is more natural, nothing more, basic to being a human than eating food. But there is such a thing as overeating, or as in this proverb here, eating too much of something that should probably be enjoyed in a smaller quantity. And then, of course, recreation. That's another one that can, be abused if we're not careful. We all need time to rest, to relax, to enjoy ourselves, and this is a God-given privilege. It's not idleness to, take some time to just, do what you enjoy to do, to go to the park, to go on a vacation, or to just take some time off and to rest. Ecclesiastes 2:24-26 says, "There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This I saw is from the hand of God. For to the one who pleases Him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy." So clearly recreation is healthy, it's normal, it's good for us. But we have to know when enough is enough. We have to know when maybe our recreation starts to border on irresponsibility, when it starts to become excessive. I give these examples, sleeping, eating, recreation, just as examples, as pure forms of, pleasure or blessings that God has given us that self-control helps us to make the proper use of. These are examples of things, and there's many more like them, where they are good and they are, I believe, a blessing from God, but if we don't exercise restraint with them, we can abuse them and really lose the proper appreciation and proportion for how they ought to be enjoyed. So self-control allows us to access the greatest form of strength. It allows us to have peace, and it allows us to enjoy pleasure without becoming lovers of pleasure. It allows us to enjoy things in the manner in which God intended for them to be enjoyed. So those are some of the things the Proverbs teach us about this subject of self-control. It teaches us that the necessity, it teaches us that childhood is really when we ought to begin developing it. It teaches us that it is the ultimate form of strength, the ultimate key to peace, and the ultimate key to pleasure. There's much more that can be said about this issue of self-control, but that is the main ideas I wanted us to focus on this morning. I want to now consider the issue of work ethic and what the Proverbs has to say about work ethic. As I said in the beginning, work is something that we do really more than anything else. For a third of our life, we spend working. And so much of who we are is reflected in how we work. And work is something that, it's very important, I think, that we understand what constitutes a good work ethic, what constitutes a healthy, a balanced work ethic. And we're going to, look at what does the book of Proverbs present as the proper work ethic, because there are a lot of different approaches to work, and consequently a lot of different work ethics, so to speak. And so our concern is, what is the scriptural work ethic according to the Proverbs? Well, let's look at Proverbs 10:4. I think this is kind of a typical proverb in this issue of work ethic, and it kind of gives us an idea of what the dominant theme is in regard to work ethic. It says that a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So when we were considering self-control, a lot of what we were thinking of and really working through was the issue of restraint. And work ethic certainly entails a certain degree of restraint, and we're going to see that later. But primarily what work ethic entails is diligence. It's sometimes we'll say they're a go-getter. That's diligence. That's somebody who is there on top of things. You're not having, the boss isn't having to look over their shoulder. They're not having to be managed very closely. When there's work to be done, they do it, and they're not slack whenever something needs to be done. And so the difference between a proper work ethic and an improper work ethic, first and foremost, is the difference between diligence and slackness. It's the difference between being really on top of things and kind of just waiting for someone to tell you to do it. Or even if someone tells you to do it, just doing the bare minimum or trying to just skate by. Diligence is about doing, I think the book of Ecclesiastes puts it best, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. I think that is the best way to think of diligence, is it's working as hard as you can, doing your very, very best in whatever it is that you find to do. So a proper work ethic entails diligence, but it also entails resourcefulness. Resourcefulness is about making the most of what you have, or making the most of your resources. And the book of Proverbs teaches us a very important lesson about how we acquire wealth and success. A lot of people look at success and wealth as these things that are a result of good luck or good fortune, that you're born into it, or you have to have things have to just kind of like fall a particular way, and you have to have this windfall experience. And the book of Proverbs teaches us that good fortune is not a result of just good luck. It is the result of good stewardship, of being resourceful with what you have. Proverbs 28:19 says, "Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty." So I like the way this is put here. A man working his land, whoever works his land. This man is not looking around wishing he had more land or wishing he had his land or that guy's land. He works his land, and he focuses on doing what he needs to do with what he has at his disposal. The Lord said in Luke 16:10, "One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much." And a man who works his land and is a very good steward of it is likely to get more of it. He's likely to have more opportunities brought into his life. But his focus is not on what he doesn't have, it's on what he does have, on making the most of it. And while certain people are certainly born into more opportunity than others, the book of Proverbs doesn't deny that. I do not deny that. It teaches us, though, that our focus shouldn't be upon complaining about what we don't have or bemoaning our station, but about making the most of what we have and doing the best that we can. Proverbs 14:23 says, "In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. So, a proper work ethic is about diligence, and it's about resourcefulness. Working your own land and doing your job well. It's about taking whatever opportunities that you have at your disposal and making the best use of them. And when we do that, we're going to develop the kind of skills and we're going to attract the kind of opportunities that are going to allow us to be able to grow and attract more and more. So a proper work ethic consists of diligence and resourcefulness. Let's consider the flip side of this. Let's consider, the opposite of a proper work ethic. And this is laziness or slackness. The proverb often refers to the person who lacks proper work ethic as a sluggard. And what a proper work ethic does is it protects us from the perils of laziness. And the book of Proverbs tells us a great deal about the perils of the lazy. Proverbs 13:4 says, "The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied." So while diligence and resourcefulness attract opportunities and abundance, laziness results in failure and disappointment. And that's because the sluggard, he does not make the most of his. Instead of making the most of his opportunities, he makes excuses. Proverbs 22:13. Now, I don't think people typically call in with this one, but this is, I think, an example of how far a lazy person will go to get out of work. They're very, very good at inventing lines in the road of things that, excuse them from doing what they need to be doing, that, that allows them to circumvent and shirk their responsibilities. And the book of Proverbs, I think, kind of pokes fun at this a little bit here with this line in the road illustration. And I want to point out that there is a consequence to this. The lazy may be very skilled at inventing these excuses and getting out of work in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to come back to bite them. Proverbs 24 says, "The sluggard does not plow in the autumn. He will seek at harvest and have nothing." So a man who's unwilling to meet his duties will also be unable to meet his needs. If he refuses to plow in the autumn, he will have nothing to reap harvest. So the sluggard is one who seeks without plowing, he craves without getting, he talks, he dreams, he thinks, he complains, but the one thing he will not do is work. And 2 Thessalonians 3:10 says, "If anyone will not work, neither shall he eat." And the book of Proverbs concurs. A man who will not work, neither shall he eat. It shows us that laziness is not simply an undesirable character trait. We talked about this with pride. We recognize pride is not something that we should aspire to or that we want to have embedded in our character. We recognize that it's distasteful, but the book of Proverbs teaches us that this isn't just a matter of being just a matter of what makes somebody more likable or what makes them distasteful. These are issues of moral importance. These are issues of really right and wrong. And we have to recognize that this is also the case with this issue of work ethic. It's not just something that maybe makes you a bad employee. It's a serious moral failure. Proverbs 18:9 says, "Whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys." When the proverb says that one man is a brother to another, he is basically saying that these two things are equal to one another. These two things are really of the same category. And we typically wouldn't think of laziness as destructive, but it is. Laziness is destructive not just to the person themselves, but to everybody who depends on it. If you depend on it, you're going to be let down over and over and over again. That is your spouse, your father, your mother, your employee, employer, whoever, or your coworker. You're going to be disappointed by them, and you're going to be constantly having to pick up the slack that they refuse to the weight that they refuse to pull. And so we have to recognize that laziness is not simply an undesirable character trait. It is a serious moral failure. It is destructive to the lazy themselves and to those who depend on them. Finally, I want us to consider the other extreme, because I think it's very easy to go to the Proverbs and see how inexcusable laziness is. But while there is a great deal of value in hard work, there is such a thing as overwork. There is such a thing as going into excess in this realm. The 23rd chapter, verse 4 of the book of Proverbs says, "Do not overwork to be rich. Because of your own understanding, cease." There are dangers to the other extreme when it comes to work. We certainly see that there are a great deal of perils when it comes to underwork or laziness. There's going to be poverty. There's going to be a lack of security. There's going to be a very bad reputation. But with overwork, there's going to be some accompanying perils as well. I think what makes overwork so dangerous is, one, if you are raised in a home with Christian values, if you're raised with this proper work ethic, you're probably not going to have to be told that laziness is wrong. You're probably not going to have to be told that you need to work harder. If anything, you may end up falling into the excess on the other end of the spectrum. And this is something that actually gets rewarded by society. If you overwork, you're going to most likely get a promotion. You're going to most likely be the one who is getting the notoriety and the recognition. But at what cost? What do you have to give up to be able to attain those things? Well, a lot of times if you're overworking, you're going to be underperforming in other areas. You're going to be neglecting other duties and responsibilities, such as your family, such as even maybe your brethren, not attending regularly, not being involved in the work of the church, and instead being only involved in the secular work that you are given to. And so overwork is a problem. But I think that the solution to it is by assessing our motives, assessing what am I working for? This says that the problem here is that the man is overworking to be rich. And I think that is really what drives us to overwork, is when we're working as unto our pride and not as unto the Lord. We're working for recognition or for riches or for these selfish reasons, rather than working because we want to bring glory to God. We want to be a good steward of our opportunities. And so what a proper work ethic does is it helps us assess when our motives have become faulty and to make the proper course correction. A proper work ethic allows us to work in a way in which we will be able to be a good steward of our opportunities. We'll never be guilty of underworking. Our needs will be met, our families will be fed, but we will still have time and energy to spare for the things that matter most. But what this comes down to is understanding what a proper work ethic consists of, what its motives are. It ought to be, as we said, for the Lord and not for riches. And I think whenever those things are what they ought to be, then our work will be what it ought to be. So to conclude, what we've learned throughout our study this morning is that self-control is imperative. It's crucial not just for just worldly success. It's crucial for the security and the salvation of our soul. It's imperative to every part of our lives, and this self-control must begin its development in the earliest stages of childhood. We see that in adulthood it becomes an asset. It becomes something that we can benefit from. It gives us strength. It gives us peace, and it helps us to be able to enjoy God's blessings in the appropriate manner. And then finally, the book of Proverbs teaches us the value of work ethic. It teaches us what it consists of, that it consists of diligence and resourcefulness. It helps us to avoid the extremes of being lazy and slothful, but also being of overworking to be rich. So these are really the two themes that we've dealt with this morning, is self-control and work ethic. And I want to continue this series. Obviously, this hasn't been a regular series. We've taken several months off from this study. But I want to come back to this again maybe in another month or two and deal with some other major themes, because there's so many other things that we can learn from this book. I hope that you'll be encouraged to study the book of Proverbs for yourself and to gain the wisdom that it offers.